Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining this meetup. And today we are going to walk through one of the important topic, which is one second, which is um, which is about which is about LLM evaluation. And what we are going to do, I'm going to introduce what is LLM evaluation means, and then we are going to go through the paper, that we pointed out in the meetup notes. And I'll point out some examples, and then we review the key topics or key information from the paper. And then finally, we will have a question and answer session. So that's a topic today. Um, so this paper, LLM-as-Judges, a comprehensive survey on LLM-based evaluation methods. It's a very important, very detailed paper, I think published around 2024 December timeframe. It talks about what are the techniques and methodologies and about the different types of evaluation. And then more importantly, you will learn, it's not only used for evaluating your RAG, there are also other uses of this approach, what we call LLM as a judge technique approach. So that was a little bit of mind opener for me. Initially, I was thinking LLM as a judge is only used as a tool to evaluate your RAG application, but it turns out there are more uses of that. So we are going to go through that. But before we go to the paper, paper it's not complicated paper in the sense that there is not much mathematical equations. It's a compilation of different techniques chronologically, right? If you read the paper, it talks about what happened, a few years back and things like that as a chronological order. It was very useful information. Um, but at the same time, it was missing some basic concepts. So what I thought is I will introduce the concept that's called in the section called Introduction to LLM Application Evaluation. And then we'll go through the paper. So then a QA. So that gives a complete picture about the paper details. I assume, right, when you come to this session, I assume that you have done some sort of RAG application, and you're familiar with the prompts and then prompt engineering, a little bit of prompt engineering, and you're very good in creating some sample application. You might have done some POC application. So what may be missing, right? In a lot of the POC that we do in my company also, many people do the POC and then they get thrilled to see the answer, coming from the chatbot, and then it stops over there. Out of 10, 1 or 2 goes to the production. Rest of them is more of an experiment to confirm there is a product market fit or somebody is interested in the company about that assistance or chatbot. So most of us don't go into that scale, level of how do we evaluate, right? How do we ensure the quality of the chat, AI assistance? Things are actually, according to the, need and satisfaction of the company. So many of us don't go. So I assume in this forum, there are both type of people, right? And some of you might have taken the application to the level of productionizing, where this evaluation makes definitely makes a difference of success and failure. Some of you guys might have a little bit stopped before you spend time on that evaluation. So one of the reason, we as POC development are thinking about that, it is not a straightforward topic. It sounds simple. We are all hearing this. Yes, we need to monitor the LLM prompts and output and responses, and we need to benchmark. But we are also getting confused. At least I was getting confused. How do we do that? What are the techniques? People are talking a lot of, people are talking, but we are not seeing the actual examples anywhere. So that is what I was going through in my mind. So we need to know what is evaluation means in LLM context. What is the purpose of that? And when do we need it? And then how to do it? How do we do it? How do we implement that? Then what are the different ways to do the LLM evaluation, right? And what are the limitations? So these are all the key questions we need to ask, right? If you go back to the traditional software engineering, for a long time, we develop, and then we develop the test cases at the end, and then later, the test case driven development. I think somebody's speaking. 1 second, somebody wants a link. I'll send it and then I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. I'm going to record. I'm going to share it again. So what I was saying is, for a long time in software engineering, we develop code, and then later we realized we need to do test cases, right, in order to manage the complexity and then day-to-day changes and then fast release cycle, right? All those things needs test cases. So then we came across test-driven development, where test is the focus first. Test cases are the focus of developing before you actually even start developing software. So the software industry, regular software industry, went through multiple cycles and maturity cycle, and then figured out test cases are important for any software development. In a similar sense, in the LLM scenario, when you take the LLM apps, it's a little bit complicated than the regular standard engineering, software engineering, right? Here, there is a lot of stochastic nature of the input coming, and the output is coming from LLM response. So there is no real test cases you can develop. So that is one of the confusions. How do we then actually test and then evaluate? So that is a confusion to the beginners, right? To the beginners of this LLM application development. But more and more, if you look at some of the way the applications are developed in a mature company, they start with writing the LLM evaluation first before even they do the RAG development. So that is a trend we are seeing similar to software industry. Now we need to first start thinking about how do we benchmark our RAG application? How do I benchmark? How do I evaluate? How do I see the metrics? Do that first and then start building the LLM apps. So that is actually a mature way of developing the software. So that is started picking up. Okay, so in that context, it is very important to know what is evaluation means. Okay, so in this context, the way I think is it's basically systematically assessing how well your application performs. Actually, the LLM evaluation techniques helps in benchmarking and measure key factors like relevance, hallucination. There are tons of such metrics are there. That's all we are familiar. We don't even know. Some of us, we don't even know. I know there are so many factors out there. What do I know? How do I know? For my application, what are the key factors? Right? Is there any document that shows that? Right? That is a confusion. Right? So though I show only 4 or 5 relevance, hallucination, latency, and I could see more than 10 such attributes, right, can be defined. And more importantly, it also based on what kind of application you're developing, right? If you're developing customer support, the benchmarking measuring key factors are different versus you're developing a summarization application versus you're doing some kind of a ranking or order application or recommendation application. So depending upon what type of LLM application you're developing, the key factor is changing. So you need to get experience, right? In the beginners, you are in this field, you need to understand that for this application type, these are the measuring or key factors I need to define. That is one of the, maturity we all need to develop as part of this LLM application development. And then other benefits are, it's surprisingly, this was a learning to me, the LLM as a judge technique also helps in improving the models itself. And also it helps in creating new data sets. It's a synthetic data set, right? Sometimes your RAG, you don't have a lot of data, right? You might simulate synthesize data For that also, the LLM as a judge technique is going to help us. So these are the different aspect of the LLM evaluation. So let's look at the slide. Here I tried to put together in my own way. So when you are developing an LLM application, for example, in the top, these you can call app development, right? And then later you push it to production. So you have enterprise data, and then data comes to you, during the development, of course, and then what you do is you create a semantic, your code will create a semantic database and then create an index, and then actually imagine you're testing, then you're doing the dev testing, and then then you develop the search and retrieval part. Then your RAG consists of query optimization, routing, prompt management. So these are all, you are developing your application and then testing your application, and then iteratively, that's what you do, right? When you have an application, you iteratively develop code and then look at the results and then improve upon. So that is the during the development cycle. So as you could see in this kind of a loop here, you basically develop a code and then test. In addition to test, we also have evaluate, right? We are doing the benchmarking and evaluation. So testing might be simple. You might think that testing means put the query in the chatbot or assistants or copilot and see the results. That is you can call it as a test, but you really want to know more than simple test, right? What are the parameters that you need to measure? That, let's call it as evaluation, and then you need to do that. That's very important. So in this introduction, as well as in the paper, we are going to go through different types of evaluation metrics. All right. And then as you could see that, the one of the important thing, we don't do that in many POC LLM application development. I can even, if I have a poll, I can poll it, but we don't do any golden data set, right? And we start with our prompt engineering, and then we simply develop, we are all focusing on prompt engineering. What is the prompt? And then what is the data in vector DB, right? And that's processed through this enterprise, whatever the data. So our focus was taking the data, chunking it, and then putting into the vector database, and then writing prompt, rewrite the prompt, things like that. But did we ever consider, we also need a golden data set, right? And then with some kind of annotation. And that is the sign of the maturity of RAG development. For your application, if you don't know what is a golden data set, that means you are not into the next level of maturity on the RAG application development. So what we are emphasizing is, for any RAG application, come up with a golden data set, and means for your chatbot, copilot, these are the representative question and answer. Doesn't mean that you cover everything that potentially users could use, but this kind of a representative has a full good amount of distribution, probability distribution for your domain. You come up with hundreds of such example, and then what you do is annotate. You visualize this a query going to the copilot, visualize the output. In the output could be, you manually need to create that output, either talking to the end user, or you can try with the LLM on your own, but then curate that and vet that, and then annotate with some tag. So once you form the golden data set, that is that is shows that these are kind of examples the users are going to try. Then using that golden data set, now we can do a lot of evaluation. Okay. um, so yes, so that is a main, first thing in the RAG development we need to know. So think about creating a golden data set, and then that is a basis of the evaluation technique or methodology. Then later, let's say you measure, for example, let's pretend that you're measuring 5 to 10 parameters. What's the use of that? So, what I was saying is, in the beginning, when like a test-driven software development, let's call it as a evaluation driven RAG development. I'm just putting that word. in that type of world, you come up with a golden data set, and then you set a criteria. My golden data set is this, and I'm going to measure 5 to 6 parameters, metrics, and I expect recalls, and it should not be more than it should be more than, or should not be more than 0.7. Things like that. You like test cases, we say, right? We want all that out of the hundreds of test cases. We will define success of our platform if it's only less than 5 test cases. So in the same way, you here define the metrics and define the success metrics for those evaluation metrics. So that's the first step we should do as part of the RAG development. When you have that, then it's a iterative development, right? You define the golden set and you have a way to evaluate, and then you keep improving your prompt, your data set, cleaning the data set, making sure enough data set is coming, and make sure you do the query optimization properly. All this is part of the iterative development until you reach that what we call the criteria of success. In order to do that, we need a good evaluation ideas, right? Evaluation methodology, process, and ideas. So that's what the paper is going to talk. But I'm just setting the context why that is important. And when you move to the production, right? When you move to the production, here in production also you see a block called monitor, observe, and evaluate, right? So what is that evaluate in production means? Okay, I just talked about what is evaluate means in development. Then what is in production means? So this is what I was not having a good idea before reading the paper. But after reading the paper, I understood, yeah, evaluate or evaluation in production means we can use that for model improvement. I will talk about what is model improvement. So you can evaluate the production queries going on by some sampling, things like that. And then that can be used, of course, to improve the RAG, and also to improve the model, also to improve the RAG and dataset improvement. So these are the ways in which production monitoring, production evaluation might help us. So that's a point I'm trying to make. Okay, so this is a repeat of what I said, what I was trying to convey in that picture. You can read through that. Okay, yeah.
Christian,
Yeah,
can I ask a question?
sure.
So web search has to be real time, right? So how does that fit into RAG? I thought RAG was document based and web search were its own area.
Where do I say web search here?
The previous one, you combine web search with
Where?
web scraping, sorry.
No, did I say that? Oh, here? Oh, this, okay, sorry. That is, no, this is more of a data preparation, right? I mean, it's not a RAG. It's outside the RAG. It's like, yeah, consider this box is outside the RAG. Okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's not illustrated properly.
So can I ask one question? I do have a question. Yeah, it's about the LLM app. Can you give me a little bit more info on that?
Okay. It's just a word I put together. So it's a LLM application. So what happens in the industry, whenever I read material, they are saying LLM evaluation, right? But I wanted to then RAG evaluation. So LLM app is a generic name I put together. It's any copilot. It's like, for example, you develop AI assistants, copilot, and then chatbot using the RAG, which RAG internally then uses LLM. I just call it as LLM app.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I would have put simply like AI assistants. It would have been easy.
And the golden data set is basically all the use cases that actually work, correct?
Yeah, sample. Now, see, we cannot have all the use cases, right? So when you are developing your application, obviously you cannot think about all combination of users query, right? Can you? We may not. We just have a representative queries, important queries.
And how many do you think that would be this golden data set? Could it be like small, big, or is it sample in few areas?
Yeah, so for my chatbot AI, since I developed, right, I have like 500 users, and then 500 users, and in a particular domain, we created what we did is initially we just threw a chatbot, during our mock-up development, and then asked users to enter whatever they were thinking to get out of this RAG, right? Then they were entering all kind of questions. It's during the product discovery, market need discovery. So we got like 6,000 such queries. And then out of 6,000, we deduplicated, right? And then condensed. And then we came up with like 100 queries. And then for that 100 queries, then we look for answers, right? Ourselves, then annotate ourselves. So it's every application is different. That's one technique we follow, right? We just asked users to enter whatever queries in their mind. From there, we derived the interesting representative queries.
Very nice. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay, now I'm just switching to why we need LLM, right? So this is another visual representation. Next few slides are the same thing, but it is going to illustrate some interesting concept. So imagine, the user queries, do you support international calling, right? And then there is some information in your context, your data set, right, in which you have some international codes are there. So and then the response from your RAG. Imagine you developed a RAG. It says we do support, right? So this is what you're developing. So now you have to imagine you are developing a simple RAG application. You load all the code, international code in your vector DB. Then you are letting the user ask question, and then response comes we do support. Now there are two aspects. What is the ground truth, and what is LLM generated? These are the two terminology we need to understand. Ground truth means this is based on the ground truth is coming from the golden data set. When the golden data set is annotated, that's called ground truth. So that's a very important, important topic or theme here. You prepare a golden data set and you annotate. Annotate means humans say, as I was saying, right? For this input, for this query, here is a response, and then a subject matter expert will review that and say it's good, looking great, looking okay, no, not good. So these are all the human annotation for this example. When you do that, it's called, you can consider that as ground truth. That means for every type of response, there is a ground truth in that annotated data set. So, and then now you think about a function in your RAG pipeline, which actually called LLM evolve. So now in your RAG pipeline, many of us don't have LLM evolve as a component, right? Some matured, of course, when you have developed for production, you might have that LLM evolve as a function. So now LLM evolve as a component or function, then basically compares this query with the ground truth, and then decides, it is up to the expectation. So that is the LLM evolve's main function. That is a key concept. LLM as a judge is nothing but LLM evolve. It's basically functioning as a LLM evaluation. So let me, this might little complicated, but let me go to the other slide, which will make it easy for all of us. First, say, the same query, you see that how it's going to improve, right? What we are doing in this diagram is you're doing a development, right? In the development cycle, as I was saying, you come up with ground truth first, right? And then you annotate it, and then you start developing your RAG. Let's say Albert, for example, he defined all the ground truth in that, let's say in a file. And then Albert started writing the code, RAG code. The very first version of the RAG code that Albert wrote, it did not answer the question properly, right? So it says that in the ground, is this context relevant? Here it says no, right? And then LLM generated ground truth, yes. So there is some mismatch here. Our goal is to take it to both up to query 5 to make sure ground truth is actually representing the LLM generated truth. So that is the goal. So let's walk through this again. Just go through, imagine that experience of you already came up with the ground truth. And then, our goal is to make sure the ground truth is in fact matching with the LLM generated response. Here it's called LLM generated ground truth. But until then happens, basically your RAG, you are improving it. It could be prompt engineering, it could be a query optimization, or it could be some issue in the vector database. It could be anything. Your data is not retrieved properly. So that's kind of the bottom line. This is the approach. If you do this approach, then your development cycle will be pretty focused on improving one at a time. At the same time, you're not going to break any things that you have done before. It's kind of the same as a test-driven development.
So just a quick question: this ground truth.
Yeah.
Who evaluates the ground truth? Is it manual?
It is manual. So that is exactly. So the ground truth, golden data set, annotated, all same. It's referring to the same. When we think about the golden data set, right? We think, if you remember what I said is the representative user queries, right? In my case of example, I told you out of 6,000 queries, I somehow condensed it to 100 queries, right? Those 100 queries, then I manually created the data. I mean the response data. That could be manual, or you can take that query, any number of way you can create, but subject matter expert create that response and then annotate, subject matter expert annotate that response. So that is called golden data set. It is also called ground truth.
Okay, clear. Thank you.
Yeah. So, okay. So I just explained, this introduction before you read the paper. So now we all understand two things from this discussion, last 10 minutes, 15 minutes discussion. Start with like test-driven development, start with the LLM app evaluation based approach, development approach. In that approach, create a ground truth, which means annotated data set, curated annotated data set, and then start developing your RAG. Then you have much control over how you improve your RAG one at a time. Okay, so that's pretty much about that. But now what we missed in this is, how do we actually test it? How do we actually do the LLM generated ground truth, right? So that is a key thing, right? The LLM generated ground truth is the function of LLM as a judge. In this diagram, they didn't talk about what is, how the LLM generated ground truth is derived, right? This ground truth is derived manually by subject matter expert. But how do we generate the LLM generated ground truth? So that is the essence of LLM as a judge. So that is a topic. So now, you might hear a few words like, LLM evolve. LLM evolve is a short name. It's acronym. It's basically acronym meant to point out some component in this picture. In this picture, it's basically referring to the evaluate the text here. So when I say LLM evolve, you can imagine that's a software piece. That's a software, or that's an API. LLM evolve refers to the component evaluate, satisfy the function evaluate through the approach of LLM as a judge, right? But now you could ask, if you can ask in this LLM evaluate, what are the other techniques? I mean, I'm hearing LLM as a judge technique to evaluate the responses. Is there any other technique that industry figured out, or we are talking only LLM as a judge? Right, we need to know that, right? I mean, is there a lot more techniques are there available in the market, or is it only LLM as a judge available to do the evaluation? That's a good question, right? I think the answer is yes. There are not too many varieties. There are three varieties of techniques, three kind of techniques to do the evaluation. And one of them is LLM as a judge. And then which is called using the base model, right? In other words, let's say that you are developing your application using, Clara, or, let's say that OpenAI version 4.0. 4.0 or 3.0? 3.0, right? 3.0. So that is a base model. If you're using the base model as OpenAI 3.0, you can use that same model for LLM as a judge. That is option one. Or you could use a minimum in a smaller version of that. The same in the case OpenAI, Open 3.0 model. That's another approach. So what we are listing here is what are the models in an LLM eval model using the LLM as a judge can choose to use the same model as your application actually using for generating, right? For generative AI, or it can use a different model, or it can use a completely fine-tuned model. In some cases, we want to fine-tune and use that as a LLM as a judge model. In some other case, we don't need LLM. I mean, we can go to BERT. It's a transformer-based model, which is also can be used as a LLM as a judge. So this slide is simply saying that when you decide your evaluate function as a LLM as a judge, then you have 4 options. Okay, and there could be others in future, but this is what it is right now. But I think I have not answered another question. Yes, Krishnan. I mean, I have answered the function called evaluate or component called evaluate can be satisfied using LLM as a judge. That's very good. But I also mentioned there are other approaches to do the evaluation, not through the LLM as a judge approach. What are those approaches? I'm going to come to that. Just hold on to that. In a few slides, I'll show that. But for now, what we decided is there are 4. When you decide to use LLM as a judge, there are 4 types of techniques to consider which type of LLM can be used as a judge. That's what this slide. Okay, so now let's take an example. So now what we are saying is now we are switching the topic to what are the things to evaluate, right? Now we talked about evaluation and then evaluation component and LLM as a judge, but what are we evaluating? So, there are 3 places you need to look at something. One, during the retrieval. When I say retrieval, we always means you go to the RAG and vector database and get the context, right? That is called retrieval. So we want to ensure, we want to create some metrics. We want to measure our code, Albert's RAG code, how good it is actually retrieving, given a query, how good it is retrieving. So I don't know whether Albert, do you have any right now in your RAG code? Do you have any such a retrieval evaluation happening?
No.
Yeah. So it should be happening, right? I'm sorry to pick you up, but since you talked the question, I'm just asking you. So we need to evaluate all the data coming from the retrieval. These are the examples. And similarly, when the response comes, we need to a lot more. Response is much more complicated because it's a generative, right? The LLM is generating it. And then there are more issues could be coming, not in our control. So these are the areas you need to evaluate your response. It should be looking for PAI and does it have competitive information? Does it have bias and then all kind of slangs and stuff like that. So some of them goes into guardrail area. But many of them, there is an overlap between guardrails and then LLM evaluation. There are some overlap. The guardrail area contains, basically eliminates filters. A lot of this, what we call guardrails, right?
So Krishnan, this is
Yeah.
not just RAG, right? This is LLM evaluation too, right? Isn't this correct?
No, that is, yeah, but right now I want to focus on LLM application evaluation, right?
Okay.
We are not worried about how ChatGPT actually, that is called model evaluation. So there is a word differently used. Even in this paper, they use it as a model evaluation. So we are not here to test how the ChatGPT works, Clara works, right? That's not our business now. So our business here is we are developing LLM application. We want to make sure our LLM response comes with the question that we ask, with the content we pass to LLM, right? We are calling LLM with our own content, and then response comes, and then our prompts, is very important in that. Prompt can manipulate anything, right? So we are not testing the LLM as per se. We are testing our application that receives the response.
Okay, and our application can do a lot of things, right? It can call an LLM,
Yeah.
it can return RAG.
Yeah.
So it can do a lot of things. That whole application as a whole,
Correct.
these are the things you're going to test on.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, clear. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, this is a little bit flow slide. I will come to that later. Okay. I mean, this is just a visual representation of what I was saying. Let's go through this. In the top, you have your LLM application, right? And then your user is inputting how much does this solution cost. Then your documents, your RAG documents has our pricing, all those things. Then this is your inside RAG. You're creating a prompt, right? And then you're attaching the context, and then output is coming like this. Our solution starts at something like $5 per month. We also offer something like that. Now we need to evaluate this, correct? That is our job. Imagine this is in during your development, correct? And then imagine you already have the golden data set and the ground truth. Though this diagram is not showing, imagine those things are already done. The ground truth is already created. So now your evaluator, right? That is a component you're writing. So in your RAG, you should have a component called evaluator. Inside that evaluator, as I was saying, it can use LLM-as-a-Judge technique, and there are other 2-3 techniques. But inside evaluator, right now, imagine this is using LLM as a judge technique. So that's why you see LLM here. So key thing is this component is called evaluator. Inside, again, you can consider as a mini RAG, right? What you're doing is you're creating a prompt. This prompt is the key, secret sauce for actually making the LLM as a judge LLM work as a judge. So you're creating this secret prompt, secret sauce, and then you're asking your LLM, and then you are getting the labels. It says basically LLM decides whether it is a label relevant or not, right? And then you compare, and then you make the relevance metric 66%. So you compare with the ground truth. So here that piece is missing. There is a piece called compare with the ground truth, and then you decide the relevance in comparison cases. So this question is asking about, this is explanation of the, sometimes we call explanation here. It basically tells what is the LLM as a judge, how it decides whether a particular piece is relevant or not. It gives some hints. It's internal mind process the LLM gives. So I think the message here is your evaluator should contain these things, right? Now the question is, as I was saying, you have to write a component, or you can use third-party component. This is where companies like Arise and then Ragas, people, those third-party companies took the job. Instead of you writing the evaluator, they basically is providing a service. As long as you give your ground truth to this arise.com, and then you pass the question, query, and answer, the arise.com internally have multiple techniques to come up with a metric and then show the progress to you. So to summarize, this component you can write very well, but there are third parties like Arise and Ragas take up the job of doing that. All right. So step-by-step process for using LLM as a judge, right? Identify evaluation criteria. First determine what you want to evaluate. Okay. And then craft your evaluation prompt. The prompt is nothing but this prompt. This is what you are creating a prompt to measure what you want. So if you have 10 different type of measurements, obviously you have 10 different types of prompt, right? And then select the LLM that you want to choose, because you will come to know in the paper they talk about 10-15 applications. Each application, if you are evaluating code generation, you might want to use Clara, right, for evaluation, right? Depending upon the expertise, you can decide which LLM to be used as a judge, and then generate evaluation and view results, right? That's the idea behind the process. Okay, so now what are the other options we are talking, right? We talked about, so we know evaluation is very important, and great that LLM as a judge technique helps. But it doesn't need to be always, we can use LLM. You can write a code like test cases, you can always write a actual software code to test the criteria, the metrics that you want to define, right? Criteria you want to test it. So many people don't want to use LLM as a judge. They create their own functions, eval functions. Especially, this is very good if you're able to, use regex. If you're good coding in regex and then a lot of heuristic approach, you can potentially write many of these metrics without LLM help. But in some cases, it might be too much to do. For example, how do you know you want to test the summarization? It's easy to use LLM as a judge to see whether the summary that it generates is relevant to the question you asked. But maybe doing that in the software code is a headache, right? So, but there are techniques to do that. But I will show you that. And the other one is human annotation. In other words, it is not practically possible, right? You pass it to humans for judgment. I know we used humans, subject matter expert, to tag or annotate for our golden data set. But during the actual iterate, it's not possible all the time to go to SMEs for their input. But in some cases, it might make sense. But anyway, these are the three types. Okay. So folks who are not done the LLM as a judge, in the left-hand side, you see, this is an example. In the next few slides, it's a Python example. I'm going to obviously export this PDF. I already did it. I'll put it as part of the Discord. But this is an example. In this example, what you're doing, if you go to the main program here, question, why does Earth revolve around the sun? The answer, imagine that the answer comes from some LLM. You need to imagine that it goes to the RAG calls the LLM, and then finally you got the response from LLM. The response is Earth revolves around the sun due to gravitational force, right? But now I want to evaluate. So you call this function evaluate response, you question and response, and then criteria. So what are the criteria I'm testing here? I'm testing the accuracy, relevance, coherence, and then fluency, right? This is the evaluation criteria. And then you are again, if you look at here, here's a thing, here's a key thing. We are trying to make LLM as a judge by using the prompting. You're basically saying you're an expert evaluator. Given a question and response, rate the response on a scale, and then you pass on this, provide the answer in the following format. And then you call the GPT-4o in this example, right? And then this question and response is passed on to that, and you get the scores, eval scores from here. All right. So now in this example, you're not comparing with the golden data set. That is for actually benchmarking purpose, so you can compare. But in this case, in this example, you're basically using LLM as a judge to get these 4 metrics, right? Now, if your benchmark says your accuracy, relevance, coherence, fluency has to be within this benchmark, right? And then you have to go and improve your RAG. That is the idea behind this. In the right-hand side is another example. Here basically you're summarizing. You're judging or evaluating the summary, right? In the summary, you want to look at coverage, conciseness, and then coherence. And then we are letting LLM to decide, evaluate the summary on a scale 1 to 5 for this coverage, conciseness, and coherence. Apparently, LLM does that job. Asif used to say that, if you remember, LLMs are good in discriminative, right? It is okay in generative, but it's great in discriminative. What does it mean? Discriminative means you can ask LLM, is this answer correct or not? Is this answer bad? So, or is it answer covers something? So LLM would be able to answer that very close to perfection. So that's the nature of the transformer, and then the probability distribution based things like that are happening within that gradients. So LLMs are discriminative. They're very good in telling you something. You ask the question not, it will answer that properly. Okay, so this is the 2 techniques, right? And then you go to Perplexity or ChatGPT. Now that this is how the LLM evaluation works using the judge, you can easily find a lot more example. And then I talked about, suppose you want to write eval function yourself. Okay, again, why do we need to write yourself? Great for reducing cost, latency. Okay, you don't need to go to LLM all the time. All right, you can still, for example, you want to verify the response contains something in a good format, right? According to some format, it should always contain only either sometimes JSON comes out of the LLM, right? Or sometimes we look for a specific text format. You don't need to go back LLM as a judge and again do the check. It's so expensive. You can write a regular expression to do the check. So you have to decide things like that, right? So in that sense, if you don't want to use LLM and want simple manual heuristics to do accuracy, relevance, coherence, and fluency, the regular Python technique, right? I'm not going to go in detail. These are all techniques that evolved over natural language processing, right? All the NLP times. So there are many techniques based on the keyword search and that cosine similarity. You can figure out some of this accuracy and then relevance, all those things. Here is an example. For example, between two different, whether what is photosynthesis, right? And the response contains what is a process by which plant, blah, blah, blah. So is this answer relevant? So you look for some cosine, similarity in that, similar to what we learned from vector DB, which is matched based on the cosine similarity. Here you're comparing these two things for cosine similarity. So then you make sense out of this function saying that, yes, it is a relevant answer. So here we are not going to LLM to judge. We are making our function to test the relevance. Similarly, you can do some simple heuristic grammar check. Why do you need to go to LLM, right? I can do it myself. If it works for you, go for it. And this is another way to do without LLM help. You can test the coherence. Similarly, fluence, right? You can test the fluency score. So this is just an example of, in some cases, you would able to not use LLM, but you can evaluate yourself, right? In some cases, we need to go to LLM. So that's something you need to decide. So when do you use LLM as a judge versus non-LLM approach? I mean, I'll let you go through that. Mainly, it is non-LLM is the cheap. It's basically compute, right? It doesn't need LLM. That's one of my point. Where used, of course, LLM-based evaluation using RAG and summarization scoring, LLM fine-tuning, da da da. And here, I think a lot of these techniques, the non-LLM based used in, before LLM era, but I think now more recent trend is use that hybrid approach. This is the latest trend. If you go to any company who are well advanced in this RAG development, they use the hybrid approach. First, they use a non-LLM based approach. If they figure out the answers, to a good level of confidence, they use. And then if they're not able to derive something or deduct or derive, then they use LLM-based approach. So in this approach, you're minimizing the cost, and then your total latency is reduced. Things are hybrid approach is always better. So that's a story of LLM. What we discussed so far is one example of LLM as a judge, and then few examples in non-LLM evaluation method, right? Well, now is the question. So far I didn't tell you what application you're using, but now based on your application needs, the criteria, the measuring metrics are different. Again, this is going to be coming out of experience, right? For your use cases, which for answering grading, right? For answering, given a question and answer, rate it for accuracy, completeness, and clarity. So I think the experience from all of us in our domain tells what metrics we need to measure. So in the answer grading, it's accuracy, completeness, and clarity. In summarization, it is coverage, conciseness, and coherence. In creative writing, it's emotional impact and plot coherence. Code generation, it's a correctness, efficiency, style. See, for each use case, these metrics are different. So I think we can say we are expert in LLM evaluation technique once we know how to write prompts for this, all these criteria, and maybe in a non-prompting approach, the non-LLM approach. That's a sign of maturity in saying that LLM evaluation we are mature to higher standard. But this gives an idea. You guys go through that, you know what are the different metrics you need to measure for your application. For ethical and safety, it's toxicity, bias, and ethical problems. Interesting. All right. Any questions on this? I'll pause here.
I have a question. So in this graph, the brief is the long LLM approach, and the Python example sketch is the LLM approach, right?
In the example, I mentioned both Python, right? If you look at the example in the slide, yeah.
What's the long LLM approach? Did you see any long LLM approach as an example, or all the example is a LLM-judge approach?
You mean in this slide?
Yeah, in slide.
Okay. In this slide, I didn't say that, correct? I did not say that. Your question is, yeah, I did not map it to. This is more of telling what are the things we need to measure. I mean, I didn't map it to LLM approach or non-LLM approach. Yeah, that's a good question, but I haven't done it.
Okay. So what's about the Python example sketch? Is this an LLM-judge approach or?
Yeah, I think, this is LLM, I feel right now, all of this can be done in LLM-as-a-Judge.
Okay.
Yes, of course. While some of them, if you are talking non-LLM approach, many of them cannot be done. That is I don't have the expertise. But for your question, yes, it's all LLM as a judge approach can solve all these things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I'm just going to be interactive. But in your example or development, right? Which one of them is actually makes sense to your application? Which type of LLM evaluation criteria might relevant to your RAG application?
I would think LLM as a judge would be one. And
No,
then
LLM as a judge is a technique, right? But I'm talking use case. I mean,
these are good things. I've never thought about this as yet. Sorry.
okay. All right. So in many applications, I would say, I mean, summarization, creative rating, quotient, okay, faithfulness. I think that's a default one, right? And then chatbot quality is important for many. Okay. So anyway, so it could be combination of all the things, right? We don't have answer. Everybody has to decide what are the parameters, criteria from these things make sense to your application.
So I'll give an answer. So in my current company, what we are doing is we have a whole set of test use cases, and then we go manually and check. We try it out, check the results, and we keep testing any releases, right, of prompts or LLMs changes or anything under those criteria. If they fail, then we go back and figure out what went wrong.
Yeah, that is manually you're doing, right? That's not scalable approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you. So now let's go into the few things here. Now we are actually stepping into the paper now. So far it is more of introduction and setting the context. Now we are into the paper. The paper, what they are talking is they are trying to make it as a mathematical function. All right. An evaluation process can be defined as E as a function. E is the evaluation function. And it's based on it's a function of what type of evaluation you want to do, what type of criteria. I haven't defined what is the type and criteria. I'm going to define, and what is the input, and something called references to the input. So I mean, mathematically, it is what defined. Evaluation is a function of evaluation type. So what is type? So we haven't talked about that, but imagine you are something all these things here we are evaluating for completeness and clarity, right? This belongs to your type. The type meaning you are asking LLM as a judge to give a single answer or sometimes multiple answer, sometimes a numerical response, sometimes comparative response. So all those things called is type. Now what is the type of evaluation you want from the LLM eval function? That is a type. Criteria, so okay, I kind of mixed it. Type is is essentially about single, multiple, or order stuff. Criteria is the one actually the actual question. For example, conciseness, and coherence. This is the type, and this is the criteria. And then type is single or multiple or list. And X is the input, and R is some additional reference. What is the output from this function? Result, right? And the result that you asked, that is Y. I think it's, I don't know what you call here. It's epsilon, or what is it function? What do you guys call this?
I think it's maybe epsilon.
Epsilon, yeah, that's what I think. And then that means explanation, right? When you write a LLM eval inside, whether it's a LLM as a judge or a function, it should have explanation of why it thinks so, right? The results. And then feedback, feedback is important. We'll talk about that. So this is a mathematically defined. Okay. So, this is a pictorial representation, that's pretty much, the whole paper is going to talk about that. So input, and then this is your LLM eval component, which is based on LLM as a judge, and then output. Let's understand this picture. The type which I was telling you, in the previous function, it could be a, score, or it could be a comparison. Your score means it's a single output, right? Some numerical number, and yes or no, things like that called score. And then pairwise means, LLM as a judge is telling you which one is better. You're giving two inputs to the LLM as a judge, and then asking which one is better, or order it in the highest priority to the lowest priority, something like that. That is a pairwise. Listwise also is similar. You give 10 inputs to the LLM eval, and then ask the LLM to order based on some criteria. Hey, can you order it based on fairness, right? Yeah, I have given 10 answers. Please reorder it, order it based on some criteria. That is the evaluation type. And then here, this is the actual, things, what you're looking for, right? Relevance, grammar, fluency, things like that. We saw at least more than 10, 20 different types of criteria we can define. And then references, I'm not sure. I need to find out what it means, but seems like R means references. Yeah, we'll find out what it is. So this is the input to the eval function. Now, inside the eval function, this is more about inside what's happening. LLM as a judge, right? Well, so far you might have thought about, when I showed this diagram, we all assumed that this LLM could be only one LLM maybe there inside the evaluator. It doesn't need to be. It could be multiple LLMs. It could be 1, 2, 3 LLMs. One of the LLM could be a critic, and then they can decide the best. So the complexity of this evaluator can go up, and go up in the chain. So that's another reason. It's maybe, should we implement this, or should we use the existing outside service, right? Evaluator as a service. So that's a good question to think. But it can get complicated, based on what you want. So in this diagram, what they are saying is LLM as a judge could be a single LLM, could be a multiple LLM, could be a combination of multiple LLM and human input. All kind of things are possible. That's the input comes to this system, LLM as a judge system. And then output, of course, right? It could be a score, it could be a ranking, it could be a category. It's based on what's the evaluation type you defined, right? Input to the system. And then explanation is how it actually, LLM as a judge decides the output results. And then it does give some feedback. This feedback is important. Interesting, not important. It's interesting. It also tells if your LLM as a judge who are implemented, it also can suggest how to reorder, right? What is the way in which, for example, rewrite the prompt to make it the score to higher, things like that. Or it could say that add more data to the data set so that the score can improve. All kind of recommendation can come from. Again, if you visualize, we as a independent, if you're writing all the things ourselves, we may not be able to do that, but service like Arise, Ragas can do the recommendation. So but it's important to understand these are layout of LLM evolved system.
So Krishnan, this is all for LLM application, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
What else? Right. I mean, we are talking LLM application only, right?
Okay. Okay. Clear. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So the next diagram, yeah. So I'll walk through slowly. Okay. Now what you understand, the input coming to the eval function and the output coming from the eval function, right? Eval component. This is good. And there is one more diagram we need to understand. Then I'll go through slowly. I mean, I'll come to this diagram at the end, and then it'll make a complete knowledge. But right now, let's focus on this. So now, let's go to this. In the paper, since compared to when you started this topic, right? We originally thought LLM evaluation is either we didn't aware of that, or whoever is already experienced might have done based on some examples from other places, but we never thought from a comprehensive approach. What is a comprehensive approach means? In other means, what are the functionality of LLM as a judge? What are the methodology? What are the application? And actually, how do we know that LLM as a judge working properly? It's testing the judge itself, right? We even though we are saying LLM as a judge, actually helping testing or benchmarking, evaluating the RAG, we also need to know whether LLM as a judge works properly, right? Who monitors the supervisor, right? Here, who monitor the judge? So that's a meta evaluation. And then limitations. What are the limitations? We never talked about so far. LLM as a judge, not everything is great. There are some limitations. Perhaps due to that limitation only, we can also use non-LLM based approach in some cases. So we have to think all things in the picture and then decide what's the right architecture for you. Okay, so now it may be a repeat, but I think it's good to see that. And the input types, point-wise evaluation, right? Focus on one item at a time. And I think we know that. And then pair-wise evaluation, compare two items side by side. We talked about that. List-wise set of items, it'll rank it. That's what type of evaluation you want from your function. And then criteria, a lot more criteria than what you have. There are at least 15, 20 criteria, I know. Linguistic, content accuracy, task specific, so many criterias. And then the references, which I'm yet to understand, but let's see that reference based. Okay, so what this means is compares outputs to a predefined high quality references. Okay, all right. So what they are talking here, remember I was telling you before this slide, I was telling you the knowledge based on the introduction to the evaluation. I was talking from my experience, but in the paper, they are just naming it differently. What they are saying is, if you are creating a data set, curated data set or golden data set, that can be used as a reference based evaluation. Reference free means you don't have a golden data set, right? You just rely on LLM as a judge itself to decide the criteria and then metrics for that. So in the paper they are talking, the paper is about telling what are the different techniques being followed all over the place, right? So they're trying to condense that. So in that process, they are saying both reference based evaluation is there and reference free based evaluation is there. That's all this paper says. And then output is, we talked about multiple outputs, right? It could be a score, it could be a ranking, and then obviously explanation will come and feedback is always good. We talked about single LLM system. Now, question is, now I'm not asking we or you to implement this, but this is more of a study. That means what? In the paper, there are a lot of references for each of these things. If you look at the paper at the end, there are more than 500 references out there. If you go to the paper, this field is humongous. Where is the paper? If you go to the end of the paper, so all these references, right? Almost how many? more than 300 references. So out of, they've gone through all those places, and what they are saying is, this, since it's a survey, there are people have implemented single LLM systems and multiple LLM systems, and then human systems. Now you asked me, there is a, if you go to their page, their GitHub, this is their GitHub, paper GitHub, right? LLM-as-Judge. For each section, for response evaluation, they have all the papers, the previous papers. And for model evaluation, so you're free to read all the time in the time, right? And this are all the information that we can see in the LLM eval methods over the time. Feel free to read it, but out of that comes, by reading all of them, the authors are claiming that there are single LLM systems, multiple LLM systems, and human AI collaborated LLM evaluation systems. All right. And it's very interesting. Now we are going into a little bit about, if you remember, I talked about in the beginning, LLM as a judge not only used to test your RAG or LLM app, it's also used for many different things, right? I mentioned that in the one of the slide. So at least it is used for another 2-3 different purpose. One is obviously the response evaluation. So far all we talked about the code examples, and then all these things are about how do we evaluate our responses, right, from the LLM. But that's one part of the use of LLM as a judge. The other parts of the use are, it can evaluate the model itself. I think Albert asked the question. So now instead of RAG, can LLM used by these companies, right? I'm just making up Clara and OpenGPT, all those guys. Can they have LLM as a response-based system to basically model themselves? On the other hand, you can also say that you're fine-tuning a model. Let's say in your company, you're taking a Llama model and then you're fine-tuning for your domain. Then you need to come up with a benchmark, right? If my fine-tuned model has these parameters or benchmark. For that also it's used. That is called in the paper as a model evaluation. So now you're stepping away from your RAG evaluation into the model evaluation, right? So that's another use of that. Okay. I think if you look at here, in this diagram, this diagram is from the paper. You can say that, for example, you let's say you come up with a fine-tuned coding LLM. You fine-tuned something, and then another is a math LLM, and then something like reasoning LLM. And then this LLM as a judge can help you to measure the performance of your model. So that's the idea behind this. And another application, right? Now we are going beyond, again, we are going beyond our response evaluation and then model evaluation. And then there are model enhancements. Now we are getting into something interesting called model enhancements. So, it is tied to something called fine tuning. Usually when do you improve the model? You improve the model in 2 scenarios, right? One, the frontier models like DeepSeek and all those kind of new models coming up, they internally improvise, right, the model every day and then finally release. So LLM as a judge technique can be used to improve the model development, right? How? How is the question here, right? I'll come to that. In the previous example, here it's used to test your model. Here in the previous slides, I was saying LLM as a judge can help you to test your model and understand the parameters, understand the benchmark. But here we are saying it's not for testing. It is also for fine-tuning your model. This is a bigger topic. This usually will resonate to many of us who already taken a course in fine-tuning or model creation. So in the model, when you take the DeepSeek or small language model fine-tuning, in that scenario, you need to fine-tune LLM. You need to come up with some technique. The technique is usually called you create a label data set called SFT, then use a supervised fine-tuning to actually update the model or actually create a model or fine-tune the model. That's called SFT technique. The other technique is called reinforcement oral technique, learning technique. So what the authors are saying here, now for reinforcement learning technique, it's a involved topic in the fine-tuning class. You are welcome to join the agents and then fine-tuning class, in which we are actually fine-tuning a model. So here, there also LLM as a judge can come and play a role. What kind of role? LLM as a judge can play a role of reward function. So in the fine-tuning based on oral, the concept of reward, there is a concept called reward function. That reward function need to generate a reward back to the LLM fine-tuning, which will then change all the neural network of the neural model. So what the authors are saying, if you bring in LLM as a judge, and then during the fine-tuning time, which is called training, it's called training time. During the training time, the question goes to the LLM as a judge. Then LLM as a judge, so the question and answer, right? During the fine-tuning time, you have both input and then some question, and then LLM will decide the next step as a transformer token. At the time, it can talk to the LLM as a judge and then decides, what is the reward, how I'm functioning so far in my training. So the LLM as a reward can tell you based on some criteria we define already, and then that could be used by the training process to improve that model. That is called reward modeling. And similarly, I know a lot of us may not be going into this area, but I'm just giving an idea. It's used as a reward function in reward modeling, and it's used as a verifier also. And then it's all towards a feedback for refinement. So in these scenarios, it is used to help actually creating a new model or fine-tuning the model or training the model. So the authors are claiming, and that's one of the best use of LLM as a judge. Okay, now, and I think in the paper, in the next topic is about what if you go back to the original list of items, we talked about the functionality, methodology, and application, right? In application is it's a lot of things. What the authors are trying to do in the paper, for each application, what are the different criterias you may want to measure? That's very important. It's a very involved topic. Take your time and read the document. But every application, it's a great reference. These authors went back to all possible sources and looked at different RAG development for each application, and then they tried to capture that what are the essence in each application wants to measure, right? So, and then they try to condense that information as part of the paper. So essentially, it is again coming back to, right, different types of application need different types of metrics. They listed out in the paper. Okay, I think we are close to time. So what are the limitations now? Limitations, very important, right? And limitations and then metadata. We'll talk about both. LLM as a judge, these are the limitations, right? You can read through that. Because your whatever LLM you are using is somewhat contaminated already, right? In some sense. So the LLM that you are using as a judge will have these bias and fairness concerns, right? So how do you know, or how do we avoid that? That's a question. And then, of course, if you are using a general purpose LLM, that it may not give you the right, right response as a judge. In which case, of course, you need to fine tune the LLM. Prompt sensitivity. Evaluation results can vary with the different prompts, leading to inconsistencies. Well, I think what they are saying that is, the rule that you're writing, the template that you're writing to tell evaluate. If you change a little bit, it might have a different response. It is very similar to our RAG development. If you change a prompt, the response looks different, right? Same way they are saying, the authors are saying, the eval criteria, the prompt that you're writing, is very sensitive to what prompt you're writing. I think which is known, but it is very important to note down, right? That sensitivity. And vulnerability to inputs, adversarial inputs, susceptible to manipulation by inputs, compromising evaluation integrity. Yeah, I don't know how that's going to happen. It's quite possible, because it's possible that you are passing your, if you remember, your response coming from your LLM into the LLM as a judge. So if your LLM has some adversarial inputs or part of the text, it might make the LLM as a judge vulnerable to some situations. I mean, I don't know the examples, but seems like that might happen. Resource intensive, that's true, because LLM as a judge has to do a lot of things, right? It's sometimes more than what your generative LLM will do, because you might go through multiple levels of evolve, right? If you talk about the hybrid approach, if you remember, right, first we try the non-LLM approach and then LLM approach. In the LLM approach, inside the evolve, it could be a single LLM or multiple LLM or combination of group of LLMs decides the evaluation. So the cost is high. That's what the 0.5 says. How do you mitigate the limitations? Yeah, I guess these are the ways. For the bias, regularly audit for bias and fairness. Okay, of course, enhancing domain expertise, incorporate stakeholders, integrate with human evaluators. Interesting. For reducing the prompt sensitivity, standardize prompts for consistency. So this is where tools like, again, tools like Arise and Ragas, what they do is, they create hundreds of templates for us. That means, yes, we can develop our own templates, but someone in industry already developed templates for each of those criterias, right? And they already tested with the prompts, ensured what prompts works to derive a metrics. So that's another thing, right? Standardization of use proper library so that you don't need to rewrite that evaluation prompt. That's important. Use techniques like ensemble prompting. That means, I think, multiple prompting techniques to decide. Okay, so that's pretty much on that. So I'm going to end here. What are the takeaways? LLM as evaluators are versatile. Yes, non-LLM approach is good, but it may have limitations. We cannot do a lot of those evaluation with the non-LLM approach. It has some limitations. Evaluation is context sensitive or context specific. We kind of know that. We do have challenges in LLM as a judge, right? And then the hybrid approach, which I mentioned, would be the right approach. Non-LLM first and then LLM second. And then maybe with the human input, the LLM as a judge will improve. Yeah. That's kind of the summary. Let's revisit, what we did so far. I think the key takeaway from my perspective is based on some of the experience I have RAG. I think it can be used for many scenarios. That's what this paper taught me, or I understood. And then I was not clear about when is the evaluation used. I was not sure during the development or during the training, during the production. I was not clear. I think I'm somewhat clear now. So that means what is clear to me now is during the development, it definitely the evaluation is very important to start with that. Start with the benchmark, start with the curated data set, golden data set, and ground truth. That's important. Then RAG development can happen quicker. That process need to be set. Many companies don't do that. They are in a low software maturity right now, LLM software development maturity. So start with that. That's a learning. And then in production, it has a slightly different context, right? Production, it's used, this approach evaluation is used to improve the model, right? Can be improved for reinforcement learning to create a fine-tuned model. and it can taken back to the RAG also. So there are some difference between the production evolve versus the development evolve, and then hybrid approach is important. And then products and marketplace, I haven't gone to that, but what I visualize now is this approach. If you keep this in your mind, this diagram, if you keep this diagram in your mind, you just need to map. When you think about a new product comes, Arise or Ragas, where does it fit in? Does it fit into the development improvement, and does it fit in the production monitoring evaluation space? So something we need to keep that in mind. So this diagram will help you to clarify that. All right, with that, I'm going to end. I'm going to pause here and then ask for any questions, QA. Okay, any questions?
This was excellent.
Any other feedback from others, or you guys want to add anything more into this?
Are you going to post it in the link?
Yeah, I'll give it to I'll post it in the Discord. Correct. Let me do it right now.
Okay.
So somebody was trying to ask something.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.